All you.
All right, we're going to dive in here. And I don't want you to get nervous about the fact that I have a PowerPoint sitting up on the screen. It's a very modified one from what I typically use when I'm working my way through this topic, but there are a few points and things I'm going to make that I want to make sure give you the information you need for this to be helpful to you. But Myers-Briggs is a tool. There are many tools out there that help us figure out how we tick from a personality standpoint, and they're all great. The one that I happen to have used for a long time, known for a long time, is the Myers-Briggs. So my focus is going to be on understanding what it can tell you so that you can walk away from this discussion with a little bit more insight. But before we get started, I'd like to ask, how many of you, if anybody here has already been through Myers-Briggs and knows your pattern, could you let me know that?
You want it in the chat, Delta, or you want them to just yell them out?
If you can just shout out would be fine.
Okay, I'm an ISTJ.
Okay, so you know what you are. I'm an INTJ, just for disclosure.
I remember like doing that quiz at some point, and I can't remember what my results were. I know I did it at some point, and I don't remember.
Okay, that's one thing I hear so often, usually when I'm in front of a group, if there are like 25 or 30 people, and I ask that question, there'll be half of them that say yes, but I don't remember, and that pains me because it's such a valuable thing. Frequently, it can become like a horoscope experience, and my goal is for you to walk away remembering your pattern. So I've found it to be very helpful in my life personally and professionally as well. But I wanted to start out with just a couple of things. I keep the humor that we need to find in the situation is obvious, and I have three things here that popped up at different times that I've saved that just give me a smile occasionally. But I think one of the things that Myers-Briggs or any assessment that you do of yourself gives you is that opportunity to have a little bit of sense of humor about yourself and sometimes other people, not in a mean way, but it's just I can go, okay, I get why that's happening because I'm a this and she's a that. But this is not tied to Myers-Briggs, but I just thought it was pretty cute. 9 is the time, and the PM is when it's time to get out of your pajamas, put your night pajamas on. This one is a perspective giving one that I saw the other day that I thought was really good. Your grandparents were called to war. You're being called to sit on a couch. You can do this. And this one this morning came through, and I thought it was pretty funny, from Gwyneth Paltrow. She said in an interview that we should take this time to learn a new language or write a book. I just shook chip crumbs out of my bra, and I don't know what day it is. I'm fairly certain I'm not going to attempt to do either one of these things. A friend of mine in Chicago posted that, and I had to crack up knowing her personality. But I think it's just so important to keep our perspective and to keep the sense of humor at this point in time. Before I dive in and go through this quick discussion, and then we'll open it up, I wanted to ask you, though, if you don't mind sharing something that, based on what you know about yourself at this point in your personality, what's working in your favor right now as you deal with our new normal, and what might be working against you. If you can't think of anything to share on this, I understand, but if you've got any insights or learnings about what this is doing to you from a personality standpoint, that would be great. And I'm happy I can share mine to let you know what that looks like for me. One thing that is working in my favor, I'm an INTJ, which if you haven't done Myers-Briggs doesn't mean anything now, but it will. That means that I have an introversion preference, and I make decisions with my head primarily, and I organize things. And so when something like this is going on, I'm kind of naturally the one who will kind of, okay, let's get our stuff together and figure things out. Now, what's working against me is that very same thing, in that I am finding as an introvert that even though on the front end of this, I thought, great, I'm going to have more time, even though I'm very independent and can't spend as much time focused on things as I want to. It's like I have actually permission to do even more of that. This is going to be great. But it's kind of working against me because I'm having to work harder to use the extroversion part of my personality because it doesn't come as naturally, and it's really wearing me out. I am on Zoom probably 6 to 7 hours a day now. I do a lot of coaching, and because of the situation we're in right now too, where a lot of people, this is their top thing they want to talk about, and many of them are very sad and struggling. It's taking a lot out of me energy-wise because I'm a natural I, and I'm really having to extrovert and I use both sides, but it's causing me some challenges. So if anybody's got any thing you'd like to share related to what's working for you or possibly against you, that'd be great.
It's funny, Delta, you just said what I was going to say. Although I don't recall what my Myers-Briggs test was. I know I took it in college because I was a psychology major. I'm anxious to see how I test now, but the introversion, extroversion battle is a huge deal for me as well. And I find myself getting off some of these calls and just bursting into tears at the pressure of holding it together for support others, but then also feeling like I want to connect this way, but it can be a bit exhausting.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
I totally agree, Melody. I used to go to Rise to get my social time, but then I would be there for a couple hours and go home. And now I feel like my life is just a ton of Zoom calls, and it requires more makeup and dress up and like performance and then follow-up emails and all of these things that have really changed my schedule. Like after everyone got on board for the first 2 weeks of quarantine, there were people adapting, and now that people have adapted, I find that I'm having to be more careful about what I put on my schedule.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else?
I'll go next. Being in IT, of course, I don't work from home all the time, but I do sometimes. And as much as you like to work from home a couple of days a week, this working from home like permanently is a little crazy. So I'll just go with what's working against me is I tend to multitask more now because the kids are home and I'm trying to get like a million things done during the day. And I've started to cut back a little bit because by 4 o'clock, I'm like dead. And there's the same thing like the rest of you said, the Zoom calls. There's one Zoom call. My team, normally we are co-located and it's easy for us to shout across to someone's cube. It's hard now because, we can't see each other. And so we are on Zoom calls from morning to night, it seemed like, because then, nobody has anything to do in the evening. So somebody's calling about something or the other because everyone's home. So, what's working in my favor, I guess my schedule is a little more organized because now I do have the Zoom calls, and so there's less distractions because it's all kind of organized in meetings. Before, I think there was more distraction, but against me is just the excessive multitasking I'm trying to do and killing myself trying to do that.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like the energy is a pretty big deal with everybody that's spoken so far, what it's taken out of you to keep going with this, especially with this mode of communication, and impacting our moods at times and our emotions as well, tied into that. And then you got to keep trucking. So that's pretty typical. As we go through this discussion, I think you'll see that there's some things that might give you a little bit of insight that can help with that a little bit somewhat. That's my hope. So if something pops to mind later for someone where it's like, okay, this is what's happening with me, and you want to talk about it, just let me know. So I'm going to dive in so that we can work our way through the basics. And the first thing I want to do is give some perspective. We all have this disease, and it's called BLM, Be Like Me. And what that amounts to is that we walk through this world with our view of the way things exist, and it's built, a lot of things cause that to happen. It's just like putting on a pair of glasses where I've got my prescription on, and I wear contacts, so I do have a prescription. I see several people have glasses, and there are probably some contacts out there. And it's designed just for me, so I can see well. But when we walk through the world, our lenses, the prescription is built by a variety of things. We'll talk about that in just a second. But we see the world not as it really is, but as we are. I'm running everything through that filter. An example would be if you and I come to a meeting where we've all been asked to solve a problem around a form that we need to redesign or something like that, And we're all really, driven about doing that. I'll walk in and I've spent a lot of time. I have the perfect solution, and I put that down, and I see you walk in and you've got a piece of paper and you look like you're determined as well. The likelihood of us matching up is slim because we're going to see things differently. But if we refuse, if my mindset is, okay, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure I sell mine, and you have the same attitude, we're likely going to have a tough conversation because we're going to be competing and we're not trying to get to the greater good and figure it out. If we're able to take our glasses off and say, okay, hey, you did a lot of work on this too, that's awesome. You want to see what I came up with? Let me see yours. And you study and understand each other's and listen. The likelihood is you're going to take those two things that were created and you're going to turn it into one thing that's even better. It's the 1 + 1 = 3. But when we walk through the world, I think this metaphor has meant the most to me in understanding Myers-Briggs. Once I am clear about how I'm built and what's happening inside my head, I just need to have a sense of humor about that. And also, I need to be humble about it because I'm built the way I am, you're built the way you are. And together, we can be great because that diversity is huge. Let's take this as an example. How many of you think that the picture that on the left that says right is correct? Toilet paper should hang. Okay, we've got some hands raised. I have to admit, that's the way it looks in my house. Anybody on the side of the other one, the other picture? Okay, we've got, now which one of us is right and which of us are wrong? It doesn't make any difference. No, it really doesn't. It's just a preference. And that's what personality is all about. And the styles we're going to be looking at. We're built differently, and it builds this diversity that allows us to either value diversity or not. And the puzzle that I've got here is kind of a metaphor as well. If I'm going to put a puzzle together, a jigsaw, and it's been a while, but I know a lot of people are doing them these days. I hear that the sales are up. You're looking at the picture on the box, the front of the box, that shows you what your end in mind is, and you're gradually putting it together. But if, as people, sometimes what we do is when we're building a team or getting our friendships together, we stack the bottom left corner piece because we surround ourselves with people who are like us, that be like me. You're not going to get the whole puzzle together. And the attitude that's probably more constructive and healthy is to go, if I'm the bottom left corner piece of the puzzle and you walk in with your approach, with your form, and you're the top right corner piece, I should be thrilled that you're bringing in the piece that I don't have. So that's the value of the Myers-Briggs and understanding that style. And there's 16 different personality styles that are considered to be inborn, they're innate. The diversity layers, though, that are behind all that, the last bullet here is where Myers-Briggs comes in, because it's going to help us figure that out. The first two pieces are your circumstances of birth, where you were born, the parents you had, the country you're living in, the color of your skin, how tall you are. There's all kinds of stuff you have zero control over when you're born that then start layering on and influencing how your personality forms to a point. It's considered that there's some DNA or some innate things that are there that even with small babies can't be changed, but you've got things that layer on top of that personality preference that's partially built in, that's going to start influencing what you believe and how you behave, which is the next piece. Your values, what you hold dear as values, your beliefs, and the experiences you've had in your life all add into that. So when somebody's trying to figure out their true personality preference, you have to understand those layers are there. And you didn't take an assessment to get to join this discussion, but I'll give you enough information if you haven't already done it. You can guess and figure out what, not guess, but figure out what you are. And just so you'll know, after this, if you're interested in taking the assessment, just reach out to me and I'll help you do that so you can actually see what it looks like. So the Myers-Briggs indicator is built, there are 4 pieces to it. Where do you get your energy? How do you take information in from the outside world? And then once you have that information, how do you come to decisions and conclusions? And then finally, how do you approach the outside world? Now that you've got all this information, you come to conclusions or not. What do you do? How do you respond in that respect? So it's a dichotomy here. You are either, from an energy standpoint, you get your energy. You're an extrovert, an introvert, you're sensing or an intuitive person related to taking information you think or you feel. You use your head or your heart, and you approach the outside world either in judging or perceiving manner. How many of you out here are right-handed? You'll just raise your hand. Okay, we have a good number. How many left-handed? Do we have a left-handed person?
I'm left-handed.
Okay, so we've got one left-handed person. All right. Now, which is correct? It's like the toilet paper issue, correct? But this is the Myers-Briggs metaphor that is frequently used to help people understand the intent behind it. If I were to ask you right now, if you've got a pen in your hand and if you want to take it and just pretend you're signing a bank document or a loan document, something in your signature, but then after you've done that, flip it over to your left hand and do the same thing. And tell me, or if you're left-handed, the person who's left-handed, sign with your preferred hand and then flip it to your right hand. Now, unless you're ambidextrous, and I know a couple of people who are, but not many, probably if you're like me, if I sign a formal document with my left hand, I'd get thrown in jail ultimately because it would look like a forged signature because I can't do it. But that's what Myers-Briggs personality is based on, is the understanding there's not a right or a wrong to any of these patterns. It's just who we are, and we need to be really careful about judging in that respect. So it was developed by a mother-daughter team who were both born in the late 1800s, one earlier than the other, obviously, Catherine Briggs and her daughter, Isabel Briggs Myers, but it's based on Carl Jung's work, the psychological types, the psychology of types. They didn't know each other until later, a little bit downstream. In fact, when Catherine Briggs uncovered his work and his book was first published about the psychology of type, she trashed all of the work she had done, put it in the fireplace, burned it because she was so impressed with his work. He later said, I so wish you hadn't done that, because they really combined the two. They complemented each other. But Catherine and Isabel, at a time when women typically didn't have any education, were very much they were an anomaly. They both came from an educated family. Catherine got a degree and went to college. Her daughter did as well. Very smart women who figured out manually how to take the theory they had come up with that they ultimately blended with Jung's and created a tool. So this is Carl Jung. He died in 1961, and this is Isabel Briggs Myers and Catherine Briggs, so mother-daughter here. They're an amazing story. I won't give you all the details, but it's pretty interesting what they did. But the background quickly, this is a tool that's backed by over almost 80 years of research now, and it's the most widely used psychological personality tool in the world. I found out recently in a meeting that I was with one of my sponsors with McKinsey and Company. I'm on an advisory board. They had coffee actually over at Rise right before all this kind of shut down. And he's a partner there. And I mentioned Myers-Briggs and he got very interested and we chatted. McKinsey uses it as their team building tool. It's the thing that drives how they manage people within their company. There are many great tools out there, but it was just neat to me to find a company I respect that's using it in that manner. That first pencil paper version was created in 1943, but it's considered to be inborn. That's something I've mentioned already. It's how we direct our energy and how we use our minds, how we come to our choices and how we behave. It doesn't measure whether you've got a high IQ or low IQ, normalcy, maturity, illness, affluence, intelligence, learning, or any of those things. It truly is not a measure of how effective someone is, because no matter what your pattern is, you're going to be effective in life or ineffective or something in between. It's really how you're built and what tools you've got to move forward in this world. So it's something that you decide your type. I'm going to walk you through this and ask you to do that. So even if you choose to take the assessment later, you decide. Once you go through it, you have to figure it out. It's not a right or a wrong. It's who you are. It's designed to give you access to your type, and again, they stress over and over, everybody uses both preferences. Even though I'm right-handed, does that mean I tie my left hand behind my back and never use it? Of course not. I depend on it very heavily, and that's what we need to know when we go through Myers-Briggs and get our patterns straight in our heads, is that, okay, this is my strong hand, but I'm in situations at times that call for me to use my left hand or my non-preferred patterns. So that's something to keep in mind. Not a measure of right or wrong, better or worse, intelligence, effectiveness, or anything else. We're all very unique. And you shouldn't let yourself off the hook, though, once you know your pattern. I've had many people through the years go, okay, I'm a T, so that means this. Well, that's what it means, but it doesn't mean you don't get to use, you shouldn't use your heart, because there's some situations when you need to be using your heart, leading with your heart as opposed to your T. So you can't give yourself that excuse. People can't change type. It's not something to be proud of or embarrassed about. It's just something to know. Just like you know your other things. I know how tall I am and what that means about how I'm 5'11", so I have to duck more than some people do when I'm in certain situations. It's just what I know about myself. It's who I am. So when you combine these 4 dichotomous choices, it turns into 16 different types that are walking around in this world. And at the end of this, I'll show you what it looks like in the US and for men and women, what the percentages are of types and what it looks like in a couple of other ways. But a lot of people get hung up on and are a little bit repelled by this box that we're put in. So one of the things I saw recently is someone who said it's really, think of this, when you think of types, as rooms in a house. You've got rooms in your apartment, your house, and you probably have a favorite room, but do you just spend all of your time in that room? No, you don't. That's what the types are. You're going to identify that type, and this is where my room is, but that doesn't mean that I just always work here with these tools. It means I'm clear about what it is and where my preferences are, but I have to learn to get comfortable in different situations using the different dichotomies that are there. So it's a room in a house. So this is what I'd like you to do as I walk through very rapidly some slides which is going to be kind of rapid fire at you, what these are, so you can decide on these 4 scales. Even if you've taken it, just do it again. Forget, if you can, what your pattern is. But you're going to decide, do I have an extroversion, introversion, preference, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving. So if you just can keep track of this as we're going, I'll ask you at the end of each one. So decide which one you are and you'll write it down. So at the end, you'll have like, I'm an I, I'm an N, I'm a T, and a J, and I'll know. And then you'll be able to think more about that and see if it fits for you. So I'm going to talk first about extroversion and introversion. Again, where you get your energy is kind of that attitude that we have toward the outside world. An extrovert's essential stimulation is from the environment, the outer world of people and things. So in the situation that we are in right now, that's really tough for some extroverts where they don't have that people connection other than through technology. I have somebody I coach who touch is very important to that person, and not having that except by electronics is very difficult. So that's how they get their energy. An introversion preference is someone who gets their energy from within. That doesn't mean they don't like people and don't deal well with people, or even have chosen professions that require them to be an E all the time. But it does mean that they have to plug in to get their energy back. And that's the way that works for them. So an extrovert typically wants to communicate verbally. They're very outgoing and action-oriented. They learn best by doing and talking. They have a whole lot of friends and acquaintances generally. They enjoy sharing ideas at gatherings, and they need external stimulus and input. An introvert, on the other hand, is somebody who prefers to communicate in writing. They might be the person sitting next to you in a cube or an office, but they send you an email instead of getting up and talking to you. They can be private and very inwardly focused. They learn best through thinking and processing. They have a select circle of friends. They need time alone to re-energize, and they appear to be good listeners. And that's appear because they're good. A lot of us are good at pretend listening, introverts as well. But many people automatically take them as good listeners because they are quieter and not as quick frequently to speak out. But they could have their mind in a totally different world that you might think they're listening to you. So these are just some cartoons, caricatures that I think are very helpful as you walk this through. So these are examples. An introvert is or an extrovert feels very pulled toward outward, those external claims and things that are going on in the world. So things are drawing them, whereas the introvert feels pushed inward by external claims and intrusions. An extrovert is energized by other people and external experiences, whereas the introvert is energized by inner resources and internal experiences. An extrovert will tend to act and then maybe reflect, whereas an introvert will reflect and then maybe act. An extrovert is often very friendly, talkative, very easy to know, whereas an introvert is someone who's reserved and quiet and harder to know. An extrovert expresses emotions, whereas an introvert tends to bottle those up and not show them as easily. An extrovert needs those relationships, whereas an introvert needs privacy. Doesn't mean they don't need relationships, they need privacy. And extroverts as well are going to need privacy as well, which is where the left and the right hand come in. You're using both, but you have a pull toward one or the other. An extrovert gives breadth to life, whereas an introvert gives depth to life. Doesn't mean they both can't switch off on that, but that natural tendency is to go deep if you're an introvert, and an extrovert is going to be going a lot wider. Now, this is how we appear to each other. E's can seem very shallow to I's, and I's can seem very withdrawn to E's. So that is something that, if you think about it and you know where you land, and this is helping you figure out where you land, you can see how that is happening, or we can draw conclusions about each other that are not necessarily true. Now, as I mentioned, I'm an I, and I'm going to self-disclose what that looks like to me. Hopefully it'll help you a little bit. As an introvert, if you're going to have a party, I want you to invite me, but I don't necessarily want to come. But if I do come, that means that I want you to give me a job. That would be great. Tell me that my job is to keep all the wine glasses collected and clean, and I'll be happy. But if you don't give me a job, then what you're going to likely see me do is not work the room in an aggressive fashion, but I'll find one or two selected people that I'll connect with and spend more time with. Now, for me, what that's meant is that in my life, every position, job I've had in my career has been built on more extroverted requirements. I started out as a high school teacher for a couple of years, but then I moved into corporate, and I've always taught leadership development. I was over HR. I have been a leader of very large groups. I speak a lot. I'm facilitating this right now, and I love it. It's my passion and my purpose, but I pay a price for that. When I used to travel a lot internationally with the companies that I've been with, I would come home from a 2-week trip, and my desire would be to shut the door of my office and, not deal with anybody, which I couldn't do because I had people that were counting on me. And I had a little girl growing up that needed mom to play Barbies in the middle of the floor, and I wanted to just spend time alone. So I'm an introvert, and I know it, but my passion and purpose caused me to use my left hand a lot. And I've had to really learn how to do that, and I'm good with that. That doesn't mean that I should try to change that. So just as that example kind of sets in your head a little bit, maybe it'll help you decide whether you have that leaning, that pull toward extroversion or introversion. I had a person once who, after a class that I facilitated, I knew her, it was with a telecom company, and I knew her husband, he traveled a lot. And she came into my office and she said, Delta, she said, I'm really struggling with this EI thing. I can't figure out which one I am for sure. I said, okay, let me ask you a question. I said, I know Bill travels a lot. He's gone for a week or two at a time, isn't he? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, when he leaves, I know you guys love each other. When he leaves, are you just almost immediately pining, that evening? It's like, I can't wait till he gets back, and it's painful for you. Or do you kind of enjoy that alone time, almost like guilty pleasure? And she said, okay, I know what I am. And she was assessing as an I, and that's okay, but it's really good to know that about yourself for reasons like that. So my challenge to you right now is, or my request of you, is to decide where you think you fall and just write that down, because that's going to become the first of your 4-part pattern. So again, a reminder that both of us, both E's and I's, we use both sides, just like we use both hands, but you need to figure out where you fall on the scale. Now, I will say, it's not good to say, I'm kind of, but I do both. It doesn't matter where you fall on the line. Some people think, oh, when they take the assessment, the preference will show, based on the way they responded, they were in the middle or near it, and they're really proud to say, hey, I can do both. It's like, it's not that way with being ambidextrous with your hands. It just means that when you responded to the choices you had on the assessment, which is dichotomous, it's not a right or a wrong, it's like the toilet paper thing, that sometimes you chose, hanging the toilet paper this way and sometimes you chose it that way. You just need to get clarity about which one is your true pull, and it doesn't matter where you fall on the scale. So sensing and intuition it's the second letter, and this is how you take information in. An S has this preference to take information in by their 5 senses: what you see, what you hear, what you feel, you taste, you smell. It's the stuff that's there. It's factual. It's in front of you. An N tends to process information by the way of kind of a sixth sense or a hunch. So it's really how you're taking it in. We can both be getting the same sets of data. The sensing will be focused on the data itself. The intuiting person is not ignoring the data, but they take a quicker glance, not a deep dive with it, and their gut's kicking in. So that's basically what that looks like. So a sensing person focuses on what is here and real. They observe and easily recall data and specifics. They gain understanding through hands-on experience. They tend to be very factual and concrete, also creative, but in a more step-by-step manner. And I would argue in the situation we're in with the coronavirus, the sensing types have a real strength to bring to the table because they really are, they are looking at data. And data is pretty important right now on a lot of different levels. They can get, and your strength can become your weakness if you don't use the other hand, because you can get so sucked into the data that you consume and you consume and you consume, and you don't ever step away from it and let your intuition kind of help you with that. Now, an intuitive person has the flip of that problem. They look at the possibilities in the future. They're concerned about meanings and patterns, and they trust that gut feel, and they tend to be imaginative, creative, and they use flashes of insight. That's well and good. What that can look like is that in this particular situation, there's a need for that person, instead of focusing just on the future and the big picture and what could be, is the here and now. Is you don't, and you've seen me touch my face at times, wash your hands a lot, don't touch your face, don't, the social distancing. So it's important for us each to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses there. A sensing person looks at the specifics, parts and pieces, whereas the intuiting person will look at the whole thing overall and look at possibilities. The sensing lives in the present, enjoying or looking at, and at this moment we're not enjoying coronavirus, but the sensing person is looking exactly at what's there and they're living it. The intuitive person might live toward the future and anticipating what might be. And again, I've already explained why that could be a weakness from an intuitive standpoint, which is where I land. Sensing prefers handling very practical matters, whereas an intuiting person wants to imagine the possibilities. Sensing will like the things that are definite and measurable, whereas the intuitive person likes those opportunities for being inventive and figuring out, taking that block and turning it into whatever. A sensing person starts at the beginning, taking a step at a time, whereas intuitive will tend to jump in anywhere and then leap over some steps. Again, you can see how that might be an issue with what we're facing right now. We need to be sensing, I think, is more of a strength in this respect. A sensing person will work hands-on with the parts to see the overall design, whereas intuitive will study the overall design to see how the parts fit together. I think about the people we were trying to solve to the coronavirus problem with whatever the vaccine, the antidotes are going to be, and listening to some of the reports. The people who are doing that are really in the middle of figuring out how to put this together without a map. Sensing, they like set procedures and established routines, and intuiting people tend to like change and variety. Sensing people tend to be they can seem, this is where we get into trouble with each other, they can seem very materialistic or literal minded to ends. And on the flip of that, ends can seem very fickle and practical dreamers to S's. So again, we see our strength causing us to judge someone else's, what we consider to be a weakness, which is their strength, in a way that's really not accurate or helpful. So we both we need both of these, but you're going to balance one side or the other. These are some keywords. Sensing focuses on details, present, practical, facts, sequential, directions, repetition, enjoyment, perspiration, and conservation. Ends will focus, or their tendencies to be looking at patterns in the future, imaginative, innovations, random, hunches, variety, anticipation, inspiration, and change. So again, you use both, and just figuring out where your pull is what I'm asking you to do right now. So if you've got that pen handy if you can decide whether you have the pull from a sensing perspective or an intuitive. And again, I mentioned that I had that in preference. And what that can look like for me is taking that long-term view, but that can get me into trouble too by not focusing on the here and now. My simple example that's personal is that at Christmas, my tendency, I realized one year after I'd learned Myers-Briggs, I need to stop doing this, is that when everybody else is opening gifts and paper is flying, I am stacking mine over to the side, and I'm getting up and checking on what's in the oven or what's going to be happening for the meal. And I've got bags out and I'm collecting everybody's trash, and my things are sitting over on the side unopened. So that's what's happening with me, because I focus on the future and I focus on what could be the t-shirt that there's a Myers-Briggs, you can get t-shirts, and mine would say for my pattern, I can make this t-shirt better, just ask me. Well, sometimes the t-shirt doesn't need to be made better, and I don't need to get my end doesn't need to redesign the t-shirt or redesign the church bulletin unless I have some value to add. Now the next part is thinking and feeling, and this is how we make decisions. We've got the data that's come in from the outside world through our intuition or through sensing. Now we're going to do something with it. The thinking function decides on the basis of logic and objective considerations, whereas the feeling function decides on the basis of personal subjective value. So it's the head and the heart. Thinking types value logic. They use cause and effect reasoning. They're objective, striving for what's fair, critical and analytical. Feeling will value compassion and consider the effects of their decisions on others. They seek to maintain harmony, and they're soft-hearted and empathetic. So here are the characters for this. Thinking will decide with their head, feeling with the heart. Thinking goes by logic, feeling by personal convictions. Thinking will be concerned for truth and justice, and feeling will be concerned for relationships and harmony. Thinking is focused on seeing things as that onlooker from the outside, whereas feeling sees things as a participant getting within and feeling it themselves. Thinking will take a long view, whereas feeling will sometimes take that immediate and personal view. For thinking, they will spontaneously find flaws and criticize, and feeling will spontaneously appreciate. You can see how that plays out in many situations with relationships where there can be some conflict because we're not meeting each other's needs in that respect. From a thinking perspective, good at analyzing plans, whereas feeling are very good at understanding people. And this is where we get into trouble with each other. T's can seem very cold and condescending to F's, whereas F's can feel or seem very fuzzy-minded and emotional to T's. And I think this is where a lot of the conflict comes in to relationships, both at work and on the personal side. T's need that feeling piece for their balance, whereas F's need the thinking for their balance, which is speaking to the point that you need to get this where it's kind of straight and do both. Keywords: thinking, head, objective, justice, cool and personal, criticize, analyze, precise, principles. Feeling: heart, subjective, harmony, caring, personal, appreciate, empathize, persuasiveness, and values. But we need both. So again, we need to just figure out where our preference lies. So I encourage you to do that. As a T, I do make decisions in that manner. And that has caused me through the years, having been involved in the HR area, and because I have a huge passion around helping people have light bulbs come on. That's why I do what I do. I love helping people get to another place where their lives can be better and move forward. But because the T will get in my way, what I frequently have learned, especially in HR, when a crisis would occur, and it was time, if we were in the coronavirus, I can solve to that pretty easily, or a layoff might be a better example. If you need to do a layoff, which I've had to go through a couple of those, the logistics and the legalities around that come very natural to me, and here are the different pieces, how they fall into place. But first and foremost, when you're getting ready to lay people off, like is happening today, and if you're getting ready to fire a single person or their job is being discontinued for whatever reason, you need to think about what do I need to do to make sure that that person walks away, that I'm as fair as possible, as graceful as possible, and that I can help them get to the other side. So that's frequently outplacement and things like that. And I really had to learn early in my career, I've got to give first focus to that when you're dealing with people and people who are in a room that you're trying to help learn something. So again, just try to determine where you fall on that scale. And our last scale of the 4, so you can have your pattern, is judging and perceiving. A judging lifestyle is very decisive and planned and orderly, whereas perceiving is flexible, adaptable, and spontaneous. Judging types tend to value organization, method, discipline. They're decisive. They need closure. They prefer to make plans. Perceiving, flexible and adaptive. They tend to be spontaneous. They prefer to be loose and they're open to change. And they like to keep their options open. I've heard someone use the metaphor, it's like the jury is still out for someone who's in that perceiving mode. Instead of bringing it to closure, it's like, well, there could be other options and I want to keep looking at them. Judging prefers an organized lifestyle. I love this graphic. Perceiving prefers a flexible lifestyle. And I'll self-disclose, I am a J, my husband is a P. We're alike on all the other 3. This is where we differ. So if you look at the refrigerator after my husband's been here by himself for a week and I've traveled, it's going to look like that. And he won't even know that it once looked like this. So that can cause some issues if you're not careful about it. It manifests itself in other ways, but I love the icebox analogy. Judging preference likes definite order and structure, whereas perceiving likes going with the flow. Judging likes to have life under control, whereas perceiving likes to kind of experience as it happens. Judgment tends to be very decisive. Perceiving enjoys being curious and discovering surprises. They get joy in their life that way. Judging tends to like clear limits and categories, whereas perceiving likes the freedom to explore without any limitations. Judging feels comfortable establishing that closure, whereas perceiving likes to keep those options open. They feel comfortable maintaining that openness. Judging handles deadlines, plans in advance. Perceiving meets deadlines by a last-minute rush. Judging is one where the J's, this again, where we get into trouble, we can seem to the P's to be very demanding, rigid, uptight, and P's can seem disorganized, messy, and irresponsible to J's. So you can imagine, I won't go into more details about how that plays out. My husband and I have been married for 36 years, so we've handled it, and we can laugh about it and just get over it. We know where we complement each other and where we have those little bit of challenges. Example of what that looked like for us traveling when my daughter was young, and we did a lot of travel. And one example I remember here in Colorado, where we were on a road trip, and we were going to the Cave of the Winds, and we had looked up the schedule, and it was going to be open at 5, and then at 6 and 7, had different times, and we were going to the 5 o'clock. So I can't remember where we were staying. We had a 30-minute drive, but on the way there, my husband started pulling over, and I'm like, what? And we were barely going to make the 5 o'clock. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, there's a historical marker over there, and it's and I want to let's take a look. And I'm like, but we're supposed to be at Cave of the Winds at 5 o'clock. And he said, well, don't they have other showings? And I'm like, yeah, but we said we were going to do 5. And he said, well, would it be okay if we do 6? And I'm like, I had to go, okay, Delta, what are you doing? Get real. You can do this. So it can play out. If you know this about yourself, you can catch yourself. I didn't catch myself on that one. He did. He was nice about it. He's an incredibly nice guy, fortunately. But that's what that looks like. So again, we need that balance. And here are some key words for judging: organized, structure, control, decisive, deliberate, closure, planning, deadlines, and productive. And for a P, it's perception, flexible, flow, experience, curious, spontaneous, openness, weight, discoveries, and receptive. So we need that balance to make sure that we've got the straight line. So it's time for you to decide what that last pattern is for you. You should have a combination of the 4. And again, not right or wrong, it's just really good for you to be clear about that. Because what's going to happen once you know this and you've got it somewhat ingrained, you can more readily recognize when life puts you in a situation where it's calling for your strength or what's your less preferred. Now, I wouldn't even call it a weakness, it's your less used preference. For me, the HR example is one. In people, I had to do a lot of self-talk about how I handle things, and I've gotten good at it. It doesn't come naturally. It doesn't mean I don't believe it. I know it's a weakness. It's just, thank goodness I figured out a way to shore it up, and I had that insight. So what are you of these? You decide, and even if you choose to take the instrument and use the instrument to get what it tells you based on how you respond, you're going to decide. You may get your results back if you've taken it or do take it and go, I'm not sure. You need to keep figuring it out till you get where you feel comfortable and you know that you've got your fit. So again, hopefully you've got to the point that you've got that self-assessment in place. Reminder, there isn't a right or a wrong to that. And the importance is to value that diversity. Remember the puzzle, remember the right and left hand, if nothing else, that when you think about this, and remember the puzzle, and remember the glasses that you've got on when you're walking into a room, because especially with this stuff, because you are built in a certain way, and you're very likely going to encounter all of these patterns or all these room preferences that people have. But the puzzle is, if we figure this out, when we come together as a whole, we get the whole picture instead of being over in a corner where everybody's thinking alike. And we're not as joyful either when that happens. So just a really important thing to think about in that respect. Before we go to this, I want to open it up. I've talked a lot. I'm not tracking my time as well as I should. It's 11:49. We've got about 11 minutes left. And I would like to get input from you to see what questions you have, what comments you have, if you've had any insights, or if you've got any confusions especially, and some of those we can take offline if you want to talk further. Well, let me just open it up to anybody who wants to ask a question or offer a comment here. And if you're on mute and you want to say something, kind of be focusing on that too. I hear a mic is open out there.
So Delta, it's Keaton. I think, one of the really great reminders in this is the, and this is something that I certainly am challenged by, because my sister is in many respects, with the exception of the extroversion part, is the opposite of me. And, we have to do a lot of shared projects together, and it just having those, I've been familiar with Myers-Briggs, and it was a great reminder for me about the messiness and kind of the circular way that she goes about getting things done versus I'm much more linear, because she's a perceiver, I'm a thinker, et cetera. And it was really nice food for thought to just have that reminder, because I forget sometimes. And so I appreciate you bringing that forward, because that in particular really spoke to me, because it has been and always continues to be a point of friction. And I just think having that reminder of different people's ways of getting things done, and even how much they value getting things done, especially in this time of, virtual, and everyone's working in an isolated way. I appreciated having that reminder. So thank you.
Well, thank you for giving that as an example. And that's one thing I really think is so important, because what you just highlighted is the importance of this as it relates to a relationship. It's your sister. You love her. She loves you. And having that respect for each other's differences and valuing it. I truly have learned to value my husband's perceiving approach, understanding what my J brings to the table at times when we do need to keep the options open. When coming to closure, even on that small thing like a trip, adding that tension to that drive over to Cave, that wasn't necessary. It could have, I need to go with the flow, and it's brought more joy to my life. But he values me for what I bring to the table when it's time to get stuff together and in order. He does like a clean refrigerator, as an example. But he's not going to do it. He's good with me doing it, and I'm fine with that. But no, that's a really good point. Anyone else?
Delta, I have a question. This is Sarah. So would you say that in crisis, we all just prefer our preference even more? Or how does crisis affect our personality? Can you just summarize?
That's a huge topic of discussion. There's a small booklet that Myers-Briggs has. It's what it looks like when you're in the grip. But essentially what typically happens is that your strength is going to be what draws you, and you're going to start working with that preference. But then it can start, if you're truly, when you get to the point that you're super stressed, what can happen is that your inferior function takes over. So what that would look like for me as an I, if I'm super under stress, I'm going to try to overcompensate for that or overcome it by pulling my E out. I actually talked with someone yesterday who gave a great example of that. She didn't realize she was giving me this example, but she was. And she said, so she's trying, it's a job transition thing that she's working on. And there's a lot of emotion involved, and there's some stuff going on in her work environment where she's coming out with, she's using her E. She said, so what I'm doing is I'm finding I'm being way more outspoken, and I'm being real hard nosed, and I'm coming across pretty rough. And she doesn't know that from a Myers-Briggs standpoint, I don't think that what's happening is what her preference, which is to be a little bit more on the introverted side about how she communicates. She's decided, this is not turning out the way I want, so I'm gonna do this. And she's not an expert at doing that part. So she's lost her respectfulness in doing it. But the basic bottom line theory is that what happens when we get into a situation like we're in with coronavirus, where on the front end, when I promoted this, I was thinking about the vacation thing and at the beginning of this, like, okay, this is going to be not like we're excited to do this, but this will be, the next 2 weeks I can do this as an eye on this. But then as it wears on and we start getting more stressed out in our heads and with the people we're around, the inferior function will take over, and we won't be as adept at using it as we are what we naturally do. So we're probably going to stumble a little bit unless we're really hyper aware that that's happening. Does that help?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's fair to say if I don't recognize myself right now and how I'm behaving, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, exactly. That's a good point. So if you're going, why did I do that? I can't believe I said that or did that. It could be that. And if you can just kind of get yourself to sort it out using whatever helps you to do that, and this is one that's helped me through the years, you can go, okay, it's going to be hard for me not to do that again. I'll probably make that same mistake with that person, but I can at least go back and even have a conversation with the person and say, here's what happened there. I'd like to ask for your grace on that one. Here's what was going on in my head. And if you, like my husband and I, knowing each other's patterns at this point in time, don't have to have as many conversations about that, because we can look at each other and go, sorry, and smile, and we move on. Anything else from anyone? Any other comments or insights or just questions? I want to offer you that opportunity, though. If you do want to, if you've never taken it and want to take the assessment, if you take it, you just have questions about anything related to this, just let me know and I'll help you out on that. But I do want to share with you, I think this is interesting. I'm a T, so I like the fact stuff, and I also had to study this to understand it changes constantly. I got certified about 20 years ago, and about every 4 or 5 years, there are changes in what the population preferences are. They do this by country. They divide it a bunch of different ways, but I just pulled a few. But in the US, the majority of our population overall is an I preference, so 61.2%. And the majority of our population has a sensing preference. The majority has the thinking preference, and the majority has the judging preference. These are very close, so that's not as profound, but we basically have the ISTJ in the United States. Here's what the population preferences are with women overall, and you can find where you landed with your pattern on here. And if anybody wants copies of any of this stuff, shoot me a note and I can send it to you, because you may want to study a little bit more. There's a lot of data out there on the internet about Myers-Briggs. I tried to find a free way to take the assessment for no cost. And there are a lot of links that say free Myers-Briggs, but when you go look at them, it's an organization that's taken it, distilled it down, and you may have 8 questions. To take the actual assessment takes about 30 to 45 minutes. And there's a cost associated with that, but if anybody wants to do that, I'll help you out with that. And I've got a portal and I can make that not be painful. And in men, here's what it looks like. I always look at like the corners on this. So look at the ISTJ for men, 20.9%. Oops. For women, it is 14.5. And there's some big differences. So that's where, if your pattern, if your significant other or friends in your life, key people, if you know each other's patterns, it's helpful. I use this a lot with team building, with groups that are trying to figure each other out and how to work better together. And it's a really cool experience where they end up with a team chart. They know what their team preference is. So Sarah, if you and I were on the same team, there are 10 of us, and you're the only ISTJ there, and there's nobody else even close to that, what you probably feel, unless the team has done a lot of work, you're going to feel ostracized and probably hanging out there in a corner, like being ignored. When a team understands that and they know, oh my gosh, we've only got one of those, Sarah, you're our new best, they really start appreciating each other and understanding how valuable that is. It's the puzzle coming together. Now, on a kind of humorous note, if you want to find your pattern here, these are the prayers for the different patterns. Mine is, Lord, it's INTJ, help me be open to others' ideas, wrong though they may be, which is showing you what one of my weaknesses is. For an ENFP, God, help me keep my mind on one thing. Oh, look, a bird thing at a time. That's, the distractor. So just kind of a humorous way of looking at what somebody interpreted from a Myers-Briggs standpoint. So I would just close with saying, I hope this has been helpful. I'm open to helping you with any questions you have. And I just encourage us all to hang in there and be kind, not just to other people, but to ourselves, and give ourselves some grace where we need it, and just take the deep breath. We've had any options that pop up, again, that Rise is offering for that mindfulness and meditation. That's so important, because you got to keep yourself healthy from a psychological standpoint as well as physical. So I hope you all have toilet paper in your houses. And if you don't, I hope you have friends who do. We've got some extra if anybody